gentlemen, my name is Tim Bryant, and I'm a partner at the Freddie Flaherty Law Firm in Portland, and a member of the Board of Directors of the Maine Heritage Policy Center. It's my distinct pleasure and honor to welcome you to the 2018 Freedom and Opportunity Luncheon. Thank you for joining us here today for this celebration of freedom and opportunity in the state of Maine. We're pleased to bring you a wonderful program today. At the outset, I want to take a quick moment to say congratulations to the Honorable Heidi Sampson, our 2018 Freedom and Opportunity Award. Heidi, I know I speak for everyone here when I say thank you. You've been such an unsung hero for many, many years, fighting to ensure that Maine's children are able to receive the highest quality education possible. You've been an activist, an advocate, and now you're in a position to help persuade Maine's government from the inside. You've made a tremendous difference. On behalf of everyone at the Maine Heritage Policy Center, we want to say thank you for being such an invaluable part of our efforts to improve education in the state of Maine. Next, I'd like to say a few thank yous. First, thank you to our sponsors and hosts for their generous support of this event. It's greatly appreciated. If you are one of those sponsors that helped make this event a success, please stand and be recognized. Second, I want to recognize a number of our past Freedom and Opportunity Award winners who've been kind enough to join us here this afternoon. These people embody the virtues of freedom and opportunity and have been invaluable to the Liberty Movement and the success of the Maine Heritage Policy Center over the years. As I call your name, please stand and be recognized, and stay standing while the rest of the award recipients are introduced. And I ask that all of you please hold your applause until I've introduced everyone. 2005 winner, Mr. Ray Richardson. The 2006 winner, Barber Foods, and their representative, David Barber. The 2008 recipient, Key Bank, and their representative, Chip Kelly. And the 2016 representative, Rupert Grover. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in recognizing our Freedom and Opportunity Award. Third, I'd like to take this opportunity to publicly thank my fellow board members and the staff of the Maine Heritage Policy Center for all they do to help our organization and the state of Maine. Would my fellow board members and the staff of the Maine Heritage Policy Center please stand and be recognized. Today's luncheon is MHPC's only annual fundraiser, and with your help, we've made it an amazing success. The Maine Heritage Policy Center has been an invaluable part of the conservative movement in the state of Maine for over 16 years, and it grows stronger every year. But we need your help, because we're at a critical crossroad in the state's history. We all know that after the coming election season, Governor Paul LePage will be leaving us, and his replacement is yet to be determined. The governor will leave behind a tremendous record of accomplishment, and his legacy will be tough for anyone to follow. His reforms on taxes, government spending, welfare, and countless other issues that MHPC has been proud to champion for almost 2 decades, will need to be both protected and built upon. No matter the results of the election, there is no way that this legacy can survive without the Maine Heritage Policy Center. Champions of free enterprise and limited government will need the ideas, research, analysis, and advocacy that we provide in order to march forward together, and to defend the efforts of those who will seek to undo the amazing progress made during the last 8 years of the LePage administration. Whoever replaces the governor, be they an independent, a Democrat, or a Republican like the esteemed Sean Moody, who's a longtime MHPC supporter and was kind enough to join us here today, Maine will need a powerful conservative voice arguing for the principles we all believe in. That voice was, is, and continue to be the Maine Heritage Policy Center. So thank you to each and every one of you for joining us today and helping to strengthen the conservative movement in the state of Maine. And a heartfelt thank you to all of our past and current donors. We hope all of you will continue to generously support the Maine Heritage Policy Center. And for those of you who are not donors, we hope to persuade you to become one. Now I ask that you please all rise and join the Honorable Trey Stewart in our nation's Pledge of Allegiance, and please remain standing for the invocation to be delivered by Rabbi Larry Rubenstein.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
The Hebrew Bible in the book of Proverbs says, Ashrei Adam Matzah Chachma. Happy is the person who finds truth and understanding. We are so grateful for those institutions in our society that enable us to gain understanding through knowledge and information. The Maine Heritage Policy Center deserves all of our blessing and support for what it does for our community. In recognition of gratitude for them and for the food we are about to eat, we say in the ancient prayer, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, blessed art thou, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. Amen.
Please be seated and enjoy your lunch. My voice carries. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Please continue to eat your lunch as I make my remarks. I hope everyone is enjoying the lunch today. My name is Matt Gagne, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Maine Heritage Policy Center. It's my distinct honor to welcome you here today to our annual celebration of freedom opportunity in the state of Maine. We're gathered here today to honor someone who embodies those principles of freedom and opportunity in her fierce advocacy for Maine people, and especially young people in Maine. Heidi, you've been a fierce and tireless force for promoting these principles, and before we get to the program, I just wanted to say a quick thank you for being here with us today and to congratulate you for being our winner this year. Thanks so much, Heidi. I also want to take a moment to thank the Maine Heritage Center Policy Center Board of Directors as well. At the beginning of this month, I actually celebrated my 4-year anniversary at the Maine Heritage Policy Center, and I wouldn't have had that opportunity if I didn't get shown a significant amount of trust by the Maine Heritage Policy Center's Board of Directors. So I want to say a quick thank you for that trust and for working with me and being so invaluable to the success of this organization over the last several years. I think that you all deserve a round of applause from everyone here for everything you've done for freedom of Maine. I'm very proud of this organization. I'm proud to work for it, and I'm proud to work with you, and I'm very much looking forward to several more years ahead where we do the same thing. We are at a crossroads. This is a phrase that has been repeated every single year in every single election cycle, ever. It's a phrase that's meant to get you up out of your chairs and out to the polls. It's a phrase that's meant to try to inspire you to action, and it's meant to keep you perpetually energized. But there's a problem with this phrase. Because it's used so often, it loses its impact over time and its meaning. If every year is a major turning point, then every year is a crossroads, then none of them are. How can I think that this is the most important moment in American history if last year
It was the most important moment in American history. And the year before that was the most important moment in American history. Using this phrase as often as we do dulls its use, and it dulls our impact on real crossroads that do present themselves in front of us. Like a boy playing with the people in his village for fools, if we try to convince the people around us that the wolf is coming enough times, people won't believe it when the wolf finally does come. In the state of Maine, the wolf is actually coming this year, and I worry that people are not taking it seriously because they've heard all this before. Governor Paul LePage has been in office for 8 years now. We only have a few short months left with him, and on Wednesday he sent his final veto message of his administration, which makes me very, very sad. The legislature, of course, adjourned yesterday. His legislative fights are over, and his time grows short. The LePage legacy itself is one that will be looked back on years from now as a major success for the state of Maine. Absolutely. Definitely will do. You'll forgive me for patting ourselves on the back a little bit, but one of the reasons why I believe it has been so successful is because the governor embraced the reforms that have been championed by the Maine Heritage Policy Center since 2002. We saw historic tax reform. Maine's broken pension system was saved and made sustainable. An avalanche of debt owed to Maine's hospitals was repaid. State government shrank. Major welfare reforms were accomplished. Regulations were slashed and streamlined. Spending, though, went up more than I would like to see it go up, was constrained and controlled. Structural gaps were eliminated. Deficits turned into surpluses. We paid our bills and we lived within our means. The state's economy responded to these policies, and today, Maine unemployment is so low that basically our biggest problem is that we can't find enough people to fill the jobs that we have available. There, of course, have been failures and disappointments, too. I don't want to sound like the last 8 years have been perfect. There are many things that I would have liked to have seen gone differently, different policies undertaken, different approaches used. But as I look at where Maine was in 2010 and where it is today, there can be no denying that the policies that we here today are championing were because of a staunch ally in the governor's mission and because of warriors in the state legislature that were willing to stand up and risk everything to see those policies accomplished. We saved this state from ruin. This year is a year of transition, and if you'll forgive me, this time we are at a real crossroads. I don't say that in a selfish desire that you vote for me because I'm not running for anything. I'm not telling you this to get some kind of electoral outcome. I'm trying to tell you this because it is a real fact. It is true, and you need to understand just how precious and fragile the work that we've done in the past 8 years actually is. From where we currently sit, Maine can go in two directions. We can either build on the progress that we've seen in the last 8 years and keep moving the state forward, or we can return to the very policies that required we save the state in the first place. Maine may be in better shape than it was, but if you think the job is over, you're kidding yourself. We learned yesterday from the Census Bureau that not only is Maine still the oldest state in the country, but our average age has actually increased to 44.6 years old. Just for a little context, in 2000 that age was 38.6, and in 1990, when I was 9 years old, it was 33.9. So that has significantly changed over time. If you want to compare it to anything, Utah, the youngest state in the union, has an average age of 31. So we're going obviously in the very wrong direction. This is one of the most critical threats to the future stability and prosperity of this state. We need young people, and specifically young families, to come here to live and to work. We need their tax revenue to pay for state services. We need them to build our future generations of leaders, entrepreneurs, and workers. More importantly, though, we need to diversify our economy. While Maine's unemployment rate is low, we're still primarily a service-based economy and have a deficit of high-paying, high-skilled jobs. A friend of mine, who is a very specific type of engineer, experienced a layoff at his company a few years ago due to the loss of a government contract. Unfortunately, the place where he was working at the time was the only place in the entire state that did the type of work that his very advanced degree trained him for. He looked, but there were really no other options here. Even though he didn't want to, he moved to Florida, where he told me later on, Matt, they are overflowing with people like me and jobs like mine down here. If I got fired today, I would have a job tomorrow, and the pay is nearly twice as much as I was making back home. The best man at my wedding, and one of my best friends, is a biochemist, and he runs his own lab. He loves Maine and he didn't want to leave, but there are only a couple places in the state that do the type of work that he does. He ended up being drawn, like so many of us, down to Boston, where he did thrive, of course, and last year he actually went to North Carolina, where he moved to get a house twice the size of the one he had for half the cost. These are not simply anecdotes I'm relaying to you. This is a real experience that people, me and people my age, have absolutely experienced. I myself left the state before coming back. Almost to a person, they loved their home, but Maine just did not make economic sense for them. Young people want good paying jobs, a stable industry that has several options, a vibrant area to live in that allows an interesting social life, and a place to live affordably. That's pretty much it. That's all they want. And yet, the best and the brightest of us, the ones with very complex skills and an incredible amount of education, are essentially forced out of this state. It costs too much to live here, the pay is lower, there are fewer jobs, if any, to pick from, and as a very rural state, the options for a vibrant social life are limited. We need to pursue policies that truly make Maine competitive when compared to the country's youngest states. We can't just marginally nibble away at our tax code. We need to slash it, and we need to eventually eliminate it. Thank you. Feel free to always applause for lower taxes. We can't remain complacent with our welfare reforms, and we need to continue to push harder for people to move from dependency to work. We can't continue to look at government to create things for us. We need to set in place an environment that allows us to attract private enterprise to this state. We know what to do, and we know what works. The concepts of freedom and opportunity are encouraged by an agenda championed here at the Maine Heritage Policy Center. But there are people in special interest groups right now interested in going in the exact opposite direction. Right now, they're salivating at the opportunity to gain an upper hand. They're well-funded by liberal billionaires and professional out-of-state interests, and they will stop at nothing to fight us at every turn. We cannot, I repeat this, we cannot let them succeed. We can't continue to sit on the sidelines and let groups like the Maine People's Alliance continually make use of our referendum system to impose their radical George Soros-funded agenda on Maine's people. They want to use your taxes and put them up. And not only put them up, but actually make them the highest in the country. They want the government to be responsible for you, cradle to grave. They want to bury us in regulations that suffocate the innovation that is just now becoming possible in this state. They want to institute schemes like universal health care, single-payer model, which was such a disaster in the state of Vermont that Vermont, had to get rid of it. In short, they want to turn Maine into a progressive dream, a democratic socialist paradise of government. They know that if they succeed here, they have a foot in the door and they'll be able to spread their ideology nationwide, which is why you always see them here. Anyone that's been following things this year has seen what that would mean for the country. I beg you not to let that happen. Usually, when I stand up here and give a speech for freedom and opportunity, I make a generic appeal for support, and I give an address and ask for you to help the Maine Heritage Policy Center. Not this year. This year, I'm asking for real. The Maine Heritage Policy Center needs to be stronger in several orders of magnitude than it is today. We need to rapidly press to finish the job that was done these last 8 years, or we need to be a permanent and persistent thorn in the side of those seeking to undo that progress. I can't do it with the funding we have now. I can't. We're doing well. We're growing our budget every year. Every year I've been here, the Maine Heritage Policy Center does better than the year before. But we are up against an implacable enemy with an unlimited supply of money. They're drowning in money, in fact. I have to rely on you while they can rely on friends like George Soros. The Maine People's Alliance and its affiliate, the Maine People's Resource Center, are, of course, just two organizations. There's also the Maine Center for Economic Policy, Maine Equal Justice Partners, the public unions. I could keep listing things forever, each one of which has more money than us alone. We're up against dozens of organizations, each of which raises more money than we do. And don't get me wrong, we do raise a lot. And we've grown our fundraising every year. We're going in the right direction, but it's just not enough. It just is not enough. If you're a regular contributor to MHPC, I do want to say thank you for that. I sincerely thank you. Thank you also to our sponsors today who were able to make this event possible. Thank you also to our one-time donors who have given us money as well. I am asking you this year to dig a little bit deeper. I hate to do it. I'm not a huge fan of asking for money, even though it's pretty much what I do for a living. But we really do need it this year more than others. Consider making this the year that you make your voice heard louder than you typically do. Declaring that you refuse to let this state slip backwards, because we are at that crossroads. If you have your checkbook right now, I would very much appreciate it if you took it out, grabbed one of those pens that's at your table, and wrote a check. I don't care if it's $5, $10, $20, $50, $50,000. I'll take anything. If you want to give more, but not all at once, you can also give monthly. And in fact, I would encourage those of you who give us one-time donations to consider also giving an additional gift as a monthly gift on top of that. Please consider giving a little extra this year and help us send a message that cannot be ignored. I can't tell you what it would mean to our organization. Your support makes what we do possible, and I can't possibly thank you enough for what you do today. And as an added sweetener, I'd like to thank Jim Ward for making this one possible. I have 4 tickets in my pocket here to the Red Sox game on Sunday. And I'm told by Jim that it's actually Chris Sale versus Jacob DeGrom. They're playing the Mets. So if you notice on your tables, you should have a little card there. It's a feedback card. There's a little thing there to sign up as a monthly donor. You check that box and you turn it in. I'm going to have the staff walk around and start collecting those cards. You will be entered for a chance to win those 4 tickets. So if you can make it on Sunday to get that and you'd like to enter in, please fill it out and give it out to one of my staff as we progress with the luncheon here as well. So that's my added sweetener. I hope it's enough. But in all sincerity, I do sincerely appreciate everything that you all have done for the organization. And even if you can't help us a little bit more this year, I do want to say thank you. If you can, though, trust me, we need it, and we sincerely appreciate your help. So with all that said, and my begging done, I would like to turn our attention to the real focus of today's event. I'd like to introduce our Freedom and Opportunity Award winner this year, Heidi Sampson. Heidi Sampson is an interesting character for sure. She's one of those people that I don't think gets nearly enough credit for what she does. And there's a reason for that. She doesn't seek the accolades. She doesn't seek the publicity. She doesn't seek the attention. She's concerned with getting things done and making things happen. Her reward is seeing those things accomplished and things getting better. She doesn't need the attention and the applause, but to me, that's one of the biggest reasons why she deserves to get them. Heidi is one of the very, very first people I met when I actually came on board at Maine Heritage Policy Center 4 years ago. I started to try to figure out what the Maine Heritage Policy Center was going to do about education. And when I did that, I started to ask around, who should I talk to? What should I do? What are the things I should know? And I heard one thing over and over again, repeatedly, with every conversation that I had. You have got to talk to Heidi Sampson. So I did. I sat down with her, I think, about a month or 2 into me being here. We went to the Whole Foods in Portland at the coffee shop and sat down and talked education for an incredibly long amount of time. And I got a pretty good preview into the window of the mind of Heidi Sampson and all the things that we thought were going right and all the things that we thought were going wrong in the state of Maine. She'd certainly be in a position to know. Heidi is an educator herself, having taught science and coached various high school sports in both public and private schools. She's also a home educator and became a very public and visible leader within the homeschool community, lobbying government to ensure homeschoolers were provided more flexibility and more freedom. Heidi also became involved in the charter school movement and served as a member of the Maine Charter School Commission. Recognizing her value and her voice and her advocacy, Heidi actually became the first home educator appointed to the Maine State Board of Education in 2011, a position she left in 2016, only so she could go actually get a vote in the legislature, and thank you for doing that, by the way. She didn't just run, of course, and she won. She now represents the people of District 21 in the Maine legislature, serving on, of course, the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee. It's no surprise that Heidi's become such an accomplished leader in her community and in this state. Anybody who graduates with a degree in biochemistry and sports medicine is certainly a talented person. Heidi's been an educator, a leader, an activist, and a lawmaker. She's spearheaded countless education reforms and initiatives, and it is through the power of her personality, persistence, and work ethic that she has accomplished her goals. She's an invaluable ally to everyone who wants to see Maine's children provided a better education in Maine. She's also a friend, an advisor, and a wonderful human being. It is very much my pleasure to introduce you to our 2018 Freedom and Opportunity winner, Representative Heidi Sampson.
amazing. And I don't really know what to say. Well, I always have something to say. But this is truly an amazing honor and privilege, and I thank you. I want to ask you a question. How many of you know the story of the little girl that lived in the Alps and a book was written about her? Put your hands up. Come on, this is participation. Am I a teacher? Yes, and the name of the book was? Yes, do you want to know the rest of the story?
You about the football game?
No, she grew up, moved to Maine, and brought her goats with her. And that is where she, or I, would be, on the farm, with the goats, and all the other critters, if it hadn't been for a very forward-thinking governor who thought he needed to have a member of the homeschool community on the State Board of Education. His vision and my vision didn't exactly align initially, but I did succumb after reading documentation, and I did make an informed decision, even though I told, I think it was Mike Kersey, that if I read all that information, I would probably just give an informed decision and say no. But I realized that I had an opportunity because I did have a different perspective, having taught in the public and private sector and homeschooled and dug to the bedrock of how to create an effective learning environment, because I thought I knew what I knew because I had a good education. I knew nothing about teaching when I started homeschooling. And I had taught, by the way, in both public and private schools. So when I got on the State Board of Education, it was kind of interesting. I was embraced with open arms. They were so excited to have an out-of-the-box thinker, to be a member of the State Board of Ed. Well, it was within just a couple of months. They were looking for a big box, stick her in, duct tape it shut, and put her in a corner where nobody could see her. And I couldn't quite understand why people would get so upset by probing questions that sort of unearthed some of the dark truths of our education in the state of Maine. And I continue to ask those probing questions, and I have two colleagues from the Education Committee that can probably attest to that. I've been told I've asked too many questions. But anyway, those are important. We need to ask questions because that's how we get answers. Did you know that the state of Maine was #1 and #3 in science and math and even English back in the 1990s? Let that sink in for a minute. We were at the top. I would say we were demonstrating and implementing proven practices. But it was in the mid-1990s that we had reformers that came in. They were going to come and fix our education system. Where are we now? The bottom half on a national basis. But Maine does have something to be proud of, I suppose. We were first in the nation to have these two most recent reforms, the Common Core and proficiency-based diploma, foisted upon us. That really isn't anything to be too proud about, because there's no evidence, none whatsoever, as much as they talk about it, that there is any proof that it is beneficial for our children. As a matter of fact, there's a whole lot of evidence that it doesn't work. But what this has done is it's woken up the people. We were all lulled to sleep with flowery words, semantic deception, dismissing what was happening in our schools. For most of you here, you're older, and you probably think, oh, well, schools haven't changed a whole lot since I was there. I have a major bulletin to introduce that is completely false. They have changed in a dramatic way. And parents are starting to wake up, and that's really exciting. And teachers, whose voices have been silenced, are starting to speak up. And with the legislation that we just passed and the governor signed, his own initiative that he signed to repeal the diploma law was a monumental movement. And I applaud the governor for the boldness and the guts to do that. Because anyone of lesser character would be more than likely, they would tend to want to just dismiss that and not face the reality that this was a problem. So he did something about it, and I just applaud him for that, and I thank him for that. But we have to realize that we are the engine of this government. We, the people, and our voices need to count. And Matt just gave you an impassionate plea to get involved. Well, how can you get involved? I wasn't a political activist. I kind of shun that term. I'm a passionate activist. I care about kids. I've worked with kids my entire life. I will continue to work with kids. You know what? There's a secret in that. You know, you at that fountain of youth, they'll either kill you or they'll keep you young. So far, I'm standing. So I will keep going. But you have to realize that your voice, if you have a fire in your belly about something, let your voice be heard. And don't use dismissive attitudes like, oh, I can't possibly do that. Don't say I can't. That really is translated into I won't. Say I'll try. And then watch how things unfold. And it is amazing. And that's all I did. And really, this award is not about me. There are people in this audience, and I'm looking at some of them, and some in the back, very special people, who also have seen this problem. The only reason I'm up here is because they shoved me out in the front and said, you go talk. But there are different people with different gifts and talents, and we built a coalition, and we talked to people. Yes, I was the most vocal one, because again, they like to hide behind me. But without them, I couldn't have done what I did. We have our social media. Jim Isgrove back there. Yes, he raised an amazing young man, Mayor Isgrove. He's my rock through a lot of this. But we have Nancy Ford, who's disseminating information. We have people who are doing the research. So you have everyone in here has specific gifts and talents that you can use to help forward something that you have a burning passion about. Use it. Don't hide it. And watch things happen. But I want to just leave you with this little bit here. The thing that really made the turning point in a lot of this was, yes, we had a lot of parents who were activated, but the teachers were silent. The teachers have been silenced. They have been bullied into silence. There's been a gag order on teachers throughout the state. As this recent legislation that repealed the proficiency diploma law was moving through our committee, I asked the Maine Education Association, yes, that's the teachers union, to please communicate to the teachers. Don't send out some canned response and then bury us with emails that are all the same. They're useless and actually are annoying. I want to hear from them. We want to hear. Our committee wants to hear from them directly. They're intelligent people. They're the ones with the boots on the ground. They know what's happening. I want to hear from them. We want to hear from them. And so we did. Over 150 emails came in. About 130 of them shared these sentiments that I want to just share with you. I believe it is in the best interest of the future students that I state clearly and precisely that proficiency-based education does not work. What the teachers in my district are witnessing is a program that teaches students to strive for mediocrity. Students have figured out how to play the system that allows them to procrastinate on work completion and allows them to make multiple attempts at assessments so that eventually they are able to pass, if by no better reason than they have done so by trial and error. Statistically, it eventually works. Or by wearing down the teachers to the point of exhaustion, and then they just pass them along. Students no longer have personal motivation or take personal responsibility. We got tons and tons of these emails. But that's what was the turning point. It's the voices that mattered that turned the committee. It was rather profound. So I want to just thank all of you. Thank you for being here. I want to thank all of the folks that have worked with me on this, in large part, in small pieces. Heather Siraki's back there. She actually submitted legislation on our behalf, No Common Core Maine. There are other people that were, I mean, we met with Matt. Maine Heritage has been there all through this with us, and it's been amazing. We've submitted multiple pieces of legislation, and 2 of them have passed. We eliminated the testing with Smarter Balance, and now we've removed the proficiency-based diploma mandate. But I also couldn't do this without my family. And I'm just so thankful that they could be here, because I'm usually out there running around, sort of the free radical. My husband, my son, my oldest son and his wife, Dane and Tara, and then my youngest daughter, who just got married 2 weeks ago, and her husband, Ronaldo. My husband, Bob, I don't know if I said his name. But these are my background. But just like the governor kind of picked me out of obscurity and plunked me on the State Board of Ed, I met other people. And it's Maine Heritage they're connected with this. Mary Adams, any of you ever heard of her? She's a key piece to me even being where I am now, a mentor. And I think of Matt, I think of Mike, I think of all the staff at Maine Heritage. Such amazing people, and we do need to get behind them. So I just thank you, and I want you all to know that I'm accepting this award on behalf of all of the people who worked with me, and I'm just one of those people. So thank you very, very much.
All right, thank you very much, and congratulations again, Heidi. Now I would like to introduce you to a very special guest who we are very honored to have with us here this afternoon. When I was still very early in my career, I was working in Washington, D.C. at a company that worked on a number of public affairs issues. One day in 2008, I was actually called into a meeting where I was informed that I was being put on a team working on an issue called net neutrality. I had never heard of it. The briefing where one employee attempted to explain what it actually was and how it worked to me lasted for 3 hours. When it was done, the whiteboard behind me was full of scribbles and words that I couldn't comprehend. It took me several months to even begin to understand the complexities involved in net neutrality, but once I did understand it, I began to realize that it's one of the most crucially important public affairs issues facing this country. It touches almost every single part of American life. It was also a great example of 2 divergent philosophies: a belief in a top-down, suffocating, punitive government regulatory state meant to create fairness, versus a belief in the wisdom and the superiority of a free market. Ajit Pai is a name that I first heard when he was appointed to the Federal Communications Commission in 2012. When he spoke, particularly about that issue, I liked what I heard, and I listened. Here was a person who seemed to understand the complexities of the issue and was a vigorous defender of free enterprise. He had my attention, for sure. He also had a really great way of breaking down the issue in a very digestible, understandable way, which is critically important for issues like this that are so ill understood. So when President Donald Trump designated him as the chairman of the FCC in January of 2017, you could say that I was quite pleased. In late 2017, he led the effort to repeal net neutrality regulations, and we have already seen the wisdom of that decision playing out right now. The United States is now seeing record investment in internet infrastructure. Our broadband speeds are climbing, and all of the end of days predictions that you heard about what would happen if we did this have, of course, not come true. Ajit Pai himself is a remarkable man. He's the son of Indian immigrants, and Mr. Pai grew up in Parsons, Kansas. He eventually graduated with honors from Harvard University in 1994, and then graduated from the University of Chicago School of Law in 1997. More important than his CV, though, I think, is just to know that he is a fierce advocate of freedom, and it is with great pleasure that I introduce him to you here today, Mr. Ajit Pai, Chairman of the Federal Communications Commission.
Thank you so much, Matt, for that kind introduction, the wholly undeserved praise. Thank you as well to the Maine Heritage Policy Center for inviting me here today. And thank you also for the MHPC's work promoting free markets, freedom, and government accountability. You know, I knew that you were my kind of troublemakers when I read your declaration on the website, and I saw, among other planks, the following, and I quote, "The aim is to identify and repeal the many existing regulations that serve no useful purpose and unduly burden already struggling businesses." I'm in the right place. So it is great to be with you as we enter the fall season. You know, speaking of, they say the best time to visit New England is in September, and I would concur with an amendment. The best time to visit New England, in my opinion, is in September, when the Red Sox are 55 games over 500 and have a 10.5 game lead over the Yankees. Not so much a Red Sox fan, just an anti-Yankee fan. I think we are a civilization after all. Sorry to all the Yankee fans out there, but you've had a good run. Anyway, today's visit to Maine caps a week-long trip that took me to Rhode Island, followed by stops in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Vermont, and New Hampshire. We are obviously saving the best for last. It has been quite a road trip. I started off on Monday at the VA hospital in Providence, where I saw how they're using telemedicine to give those who have worn the uniform advanced techniques to treat conditions like PTSD. Then I went to Hartford, where I met first responders who are at the cutting edge of deploying next generation 911 technology to help keep people safe and to help those with speech disabilities or domestic violence victims reach 911 via text message. Then I met with entrepreneurs and innovators who are in Vermont and in New Hampshire. In New Hampshire, for example, in Manchester, they've transformed the town from an old fading mill town to a growing tech hub. And then I also, I will confess, stopped by ESPN in Bristol, Connecticut. There is no length I will not go to get good fantasy football advice for my struggling team. Anyway, the takeaways have been unique, but the time away from Washington is not. Since becoming chairman, I've made it a point to hit the road as much as possible. I want to get a firsthand look at how the internet can create opportunities and also to understand how communities are handling the challenges as we transition to a digital economy. As of today, I have now been to 41 states and the territories of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands since becoming chairman in January of 2017, and I stopped counting the miles logged and beaten up rental cars once we hit about 5,500. To be frank, one upside of these trips is getting away from the toxic environment in Washington. It is a useful reminder that we are not as divided as cable news or Twitter would have you believe. And given that we're in Maine, I can't help but think of one thing that I think nearly all Americans agree on, or should at least. That is the greatness of the Shawshank Redemption. As we gather today, we are only 15 miles from Buxton, the town where Andy Dufresne left the note for Red along the rock wall at the base of the mighty oak. I know they filmed that scene in Ohio. Fake views, you might call it, but stay with me. One of the big reasons why the movie has resonated over the years is that many of its themes are timeless, and they are more relevant to the digital age than you might think. So, with an assist from Andy and Red and friends, I would like to talk to you today about some of the principles that guide my work as chairman of the FCC and the specific actions we are taking to seize the opportunities of the digital age. And before I continue, a quick disclaimer. My remarks assume that everyone has seen Shawshank. If you haven't seen this movie, especially if you live in Maine, I have one thing to say to you. What have you been doing for the last quarter century? Get on the stick already. It's available. The internet still works. You can stream it, I promise. Anyway, the first line from the movie that comes to mind is not from Andy or Red, but from Brooks. If you recall, Brooks is the older gentleman who was released from Shawshank after 42 years and was completely overwhelmed upon his release. As Brooks put it, the world went and got itself in a big damn hurry. And I think that's a pretty good summation of our times. New technologies are changing almost every aspect of our lives, how we work, how we stay in touch with friends and family, how we learn, how we engage politically, how we entertain ourselves, how we shop, and even that most human interaction of all, how we meet that special someone. During my travels across the country, I have seen the promise of what I call digital opportunity, what is possible with internet access. In the past few months alone, I have met an 8th grader at a tribal school in New Mexico who was as stunned as she was thrilled that the FCC's policies helped deliver high-speed internet access to her school. I've met a potato farmer in Idaho who's using everything from wireless apps to automated equipment in order to boost his productivity and save costs. I've met the school superintendent in a lower-income Kentucky county whose school children can now benefit from a telemedicine link with Vanderbilt, a vital connection considering that there's not a single pediatrician in his entire county. I've met African-American entrepreneurs in North Carolina who are pioneering great ideas and promoting STEM learning. I've met folks in Louisiana who are connecting public housing projects with fiber to give low-income residents a chance to educate themselves, to apply for jobs, to seize control of their own future. And I've met public safety officials in Illinois who are using internet-based 911 to keep people safer than ever. These are just a few of the Americans I've met, and these are the Americans who inspire me. These are the stories that motivate me. They give their communities and me hope about America's future. And as Andy Dufresne memorably said in Shawshank, hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies. But I'm afraid that too many Americans don't have that hope, don't have the ability to tell those stories. There is a real digital divide in this country, the gap between those who have access to the internet and those who don't. And I know what that gap is like. As Matt pointed out, I grew up in rural Kansas, where countless towns are on the wrong side of the digital divide. And one aspect of that divide in Kansas also holds true for Maine, and that is the threat of population loss. Yes, as I understand it, Portland is growing, but Bangor and Augusta have lost population in this decade. And the brain drain is even greater in Maine's rural areas. And that is unfortunate. Rural Americans should not have to leave their hometowns in order to have the same opportunities as everyone else. But the fact is that we are witnessing, and have been for some time, the steady decline of rural America. It's no surprise that rural areas lag behind when it comes to internet access. According to the FCC's most recent available data, only 2% of urban Americans lack access to fixed, terrestrial, high-speed internet of at least 25 megabits per second, which is the FCC's definition of broadband. But that increases to almost 30% in rural areas. Now, of course, I'm not saying that broadband will solve all of America's, rural America's problems, but connectivity can help, including by slowing or perhaps even reversing the trend of population loss. For example, with a fast internet connection, rural entrepreneurs can compete in a national market while still working in the community where they grew up with a lifestyle that they love. And that is why my mission and the FCC's top priority is closing the digital divide and maximizing the benefits of broadband for the American people. And the FCC is working to achieve that goal through market-based principles. We want private companies to have the strongest possible business case for raising the capital and hiring the crews and building the networks that are going to connect Americans with digital opportunity. But one big obstacle to doing that, to building these high-speed networks, is unnecessary regulation, a micromanaging approach too often taken by federal and state and local governments. It reminds me of the scene in Shawshank where Red is working at the grocery store and he asks, "Restroom break, boss?" And the boss motions him over and quietly replies, "You don't need to ask me every time you need to go." I think many broadband providers and entrepreneurs writ large would appreciate that kind of flexibility from the government, not having to ask permission for every single business decision. And the FCC has adopted many reforms along those lines in order to help promote more infrastructure investment. For example, we have modernized our regulations to make it easier for carriers to stop spending money propping up the fading copper networks of yesterday and start building the high-speed fiber connections of tomorrow. And we're updating our wireless infrastructure rules to promote 5G, which is the next generation of wireless connectivity. 5G networks will deliver gigabit speeds and applications that we can't even conceive today. And these networks will look very different from the 4G LTE networks that we know today. Providers will rely more on small cells that are sometimes the size of a pizza box instead of 200-foot cell towers. But it doesn't make sense for small cells to be subject to the same regulatory review process as a 200-foot tower. And so we've exempted these small cells from federal historic preservation and environmental reviews that are designed for tall towers. This simple but profound reform is already producing results. Indeed, one carrier recently reported that during the first 17 days that these new rules were in effect, it cleared about half as many sites for construction as it had in the prior 6 months. That means better services, faster speeds, more competition for American consumers. Now, to promote better wireless services, we are also pushing a lot more spectrum into the commercial marketplace. For example, in November, we will start an auction of the so-called 28 gigahertz band, followed immediately by an auction of 24 gigahertz spectrum. And then in the second half of next year, we will auction off 3 more spectrum bands. These auctions will help the United States lead the entire world in 5G development and make sure that the market in the United States is the best one for innovation and investment. Another path-breaking reform involves something called one-touch make-ready, and it is as arcane a term as it might seem, but here's the basic background. For a competitive entrant, especially a smaller company, building a network, a high-speed network, often requires stringing fiber along utility poles. This can be hard, if not impossible, if you have to rely on other companies to make room for you on those poles. And until recently, an entrant seeking to attach fiber to a pole had to wait for and then pay for each company to sequentially move existing equipment and wires. This process can take months, and the bill for multiple truck rolls can add up pretty quickly. And so for companies of any size, pole attachment problems represent one of the biggest barriers to broadband deployment. If you are unhappy with the internet access you have, one reason is that it takes a long time to get access to these poles. And so in early August, the FCC adopted a policy that would allow a single entity to do all of the requisite work on these utility poles, a policy called one-touch make-ready. This policy could substantially lower the cost and shorten the time to deploy broadband on these poles. Now, of course, even without all of these arcane regulatory reforms I've discussed today, there are some areas where the business case for broadband deployment just won't exist, no matter how much red tape that you cut. And these are typically rural areas with sparser populations and lower incomes. Following Congress's command from many years ago, the FCC manages programs to connect these rural communities called the Universal Service Fund, or USF. And for many years, the USF had progressed along without much reform. But when I got into office, we decided to apply market principles and fiscal discipline to maximize the impact of each taxpayer dollar. First, we are directing funding to broadband providers to leverage instead of displace private capital expenditures. Instead of subsidizing a 4th, a 5th, or even a 6th competitor in a part of the country that already has service, we're going to direct those monies to parts of the country that are on the wrong side of the divide. Also, using a first-of-its-kind reverse auction, we recently awarded about $1.5 billion to connect over 700,000 homes and businesses nationwide, including $4.7 million to connect over 4,000 unserved homes in Maine. And by using an auction, instead of simply writing checks without accountability, we distributed funding much more efficiently. And to quantify that for you, because of our competitive bidding process, we lowered the cost of serving those 700,000 locations from $5 billion to $1.5 billion, a $3.5 billion savings that even in Washington is a pretty decent chunk of change. Now, of course, it is not enough to make sure that all Americans have high-speed internet access. We also need to preserve the internet itself as an open platform for innovation and free expression. To me, the key to the internet's revolutionary impact is that it enabled permissionless innovation. Anyone with an idea and a broadband connection could share his or her vision with anybody, anyone, anywhere, anytime. As Red once said of Andy, some birds aren't meant to be caged. We feel the same way about internet entrepreneurs. And by removing barriers to market access, the internet freed American inventors to change the course of human history. And it democratized entrepreneurship so that anybody, whether in Silicon Valley or in Buxton, Maine, could set up a business. And this brings me to the much debated and often distorted topic of net neutrality. And let me explain what the FCC did and why we did it. And I won't take the 3 hours that it took when Matt was first learning about it in 2008. Unless you'd like, I got a lot of material. Anyway, I'll start with a few key principles and some key facts. I believe in a free and open internet. That is what has given America the internet economy that is the envy of the world. And that internet economy grew and thrived under a light-touch regulatory regime that started with a bipartisan agreement between President Clinton and a Republican Congress in 1996, which is to have an internet that was, quote, unfettered by federal and state regulation. That model served us well for almost 2 decades. But in 2015, a partisan majority of the FCC abandoned this successful approach. And they chose a different, narrow path. The internet wasn't broken. We were not living in some digital hellscape in 2015. But the FCC decided to impose heavy-handed rules to fix it anyway. Rules developed in the 1930s, and they decided to regulate the internet like a slow-moving utility. And following this vote, as I predicted, investment in broadband networks fell for 2 straight years, the only time this has happened outside of a recession during the entire internet era. Talk about an unforced error. Well, thankfully, in December of 2017, the FCC decided to reverse course. We've restored light touch rules that will both protect consumers and promote infrastructure investment. And one part of our approach is to require basic transparency. Every single internet service provider, big or small, has to disclose to us, to the American public, all kinds of business practices. If an ISP is going to start blocking lawful content, everyone will know. If an ISP starts throttling services based on the nature of that content, everyone will know. This is a powerful disincentive for bad behavior, a disincentive, I would add, that does not apply to Silicon Valley tech giants. Now, you might appreciate this point as the Maine Heritage Policy Center's research and analysis has shined a light on and has helped to root out waste in Maine's budget. Transparency is a powerful tool. Now, another tool that we use is to empower the Federal Trade Commission to take action if broadband providers engage in anti-competitive conduct or unfair or deceptive trade practices. This is authority that the FCC stripped from the FTC when it decided to regulate the internet like a slow-moving utility. And the chairman of the FCC has been very clear that he will exercise that power under existing law. And so, in sum, our light touch rules will give us the high-speed networks that we need, not heavy-handed rules that will freeze us into the networks that we already have. Now, of course, it's no surprise that those who demand greater government control of the internet haven't given up. Their latest tactic is pushing state governments to regulate the internet. Last month, we saw the most egregious example of this, which comes from California. The California state legislature passed a radical anti-consumer internet regulation bill that would impose restrictions even more burdensome than the ones adopted by the FCC in 2015. Now, in a way, I can understand why they succumbed to the temptation to regulate. After all, I suppose a broadband pipe might look to some, like a plastic straw. I'm here all week. But if this law is signed by the governor, what would it do? Among other things, it would prevent California consumers from buying many free data plans. Now, these free data plans allow consumers to stream video or music and the like to their phones, exempt from any data limits. And they are proven, understandably, very popular in the marketplace, especially among lower-income Americans. But nanny-state California legislators apparently want to ban their constituents from having this choice. They have met the enemy, and the enemy is free data. Well, the broader problem is that California's micromanagement poses a risk to the rest of the country. After all, broadband is an interstate service. Internet traffic does not recognize state limits. And it follows that only the federal government can set policy for this area. And if individual states like California decide to regulate the internet, this will have a direct impact on consumers in other states. And among other reasons, this is why efforts like California's are not just unwise, but illegal. In fact, just last week, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 8th Circuit reaffirmed the well-established law that state regulation of information services, an interstate service, is preempted by federal law. And last December, the FCC made clear that broadband is just such an information service. So let me be clear. The internet should be run by engineers, entrepreneurs, and technologists, not by lawyers, bureaucrats, and politicians in Washington. That is what we decided in 2017. That is what we are going to fight to make sure it stays the law. Now, in closing, speaking of standing and fighting, let me close with this. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about Andy Dufresne was his unshaking persistence and his patience. You remember when he was running the prison library? He wrote to the state comptroller's office once a week seeking money for new books, and after 6 years, he finally got a check for $200 and a box of donated books and records. Instead of settling for that, he then started writing 2 letters a week. And who could forget how Andy also patiently chipped away at his wall with a miniature pickaxe for nearly 20 years in order to reclaim his own freedom. Andy was constantly being tested, but he never backed down. He never gave up. He always stayed true to his principles. And so my final message to you today is pretty simple. Stay engaged, never give up, and stay true to your principles. You are champions for free market principles in a politically divided state. You'll win some battles, and you'll lose some. I've been there, I've done that. It won't be easy, but the principles of free markets and free minds are always worth fighting for. They've made us the most prosperous nation on earth. They've made this country a beacon for freedom around the world. They've always propelled America forward, and they'll continue to light the way. So when the inevitable setbacks come, don't give up. Fight even harder. As Andy Dufresne once said, get busy living or get busy dying. I intend to get busy living. Thanks very much for your attention.
All right, so really quickly, I had 2 programming notes before I make a remark for Mr. Pai here and then dismiss you all. As a reminder, those 4 Red Sox tickets are on the line, so if you check that little box that says, I will become a monthly donor, and give it to Jake or any one of my staff that's running around right now. Just one final primer here. Apparently, they're front row on the third base side, if that's a sweetener, so Jim wanted me to mention that to you as well. Secondly, I also want to mention, you probably saw it on your way in the door, but there is a petition signature gathering effort outside of our doors here to try to implore Senator Collins to vote in confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh. So if you haven't signed that yet, get over there and probably sign it, okay? So thank you very much to Chairman Pai for joining us here for this wonderful afternoon, and thank you so much to everybody who's been here. Before he goes, I do want to make sure that we give him a gift on the way out the door. Now, I did a little research on the internet and found that the rumor has it that Chairman Pai is fond of Allagash beer. So if you'll notice, behind you, Chairman Pai, on that table there, you'll find an Allagash beer. What is that? It's a cup. It's an Allagash. It's very hard to find things that are in the gift limits for people who work for the government. So it's a cup, and then next to that is also an Allagash beer can opener that goes with it. So those 2 items together, we got under the limit. So congratulations. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. So just before I let you go, let me go ahead and collect all these. One more last call. Any other cards for the staff members? I got a card right there. I'll take these. Got 2 more, I think, over there. Terry, you got all yours? It's a little bit of a pregnant pause, don't worry. All right, so I've got the tickets. They're in my hand. Ladies and gentlemen, who's going to win? Remember, Chris Sale versus Jacob deGrom. Should be a good time. All right, so we got more. Beautifully done, everyone. Bravo. All right, so my random picking of a winner commences, and hopefully you wrote legibly because the winner is Candy Lee Hoy. So, as always, just as a parting thought, I want to say a very special thank you to everybody who was able to join us here for our celebration of freedom and opportunity. A definite thank you to our award winner this year, Heidi Sampson, who's been an unbelievable champion for kids across the state of Maine for a very long time and absolutely deserving of her award today. And a very special thank you as well to Chairman Pai that was nice enough to visit and give us a great talk on internet freedom. I very much appreciate it. Thanks so much, Chairman Pai. Thank you all, and you're dismissed. We'll see you again next year.